Okay, for the next video in our series of breaking open perfectly good cassette tapes, we're going to be tearing open Phil Collins' Hello, I Must Be Going, and we're going to actually break open this shell so you can see what it looks like inside this particular cassette tape. And it's the kind of thing, it'll show you a little bit about what we do here at the Audio Mover Studio. For those of you that follow the channel, you'll know that what we do here is we take old audio and videotapes and convert them to digital. And we don't do this kind of tape, though. What I mean is not copyrighted tapes like this that you'd buy that, you know, with artists and things on it. Most of the stuff that gets sent to us are things that, you know, people have recorded. They're kids' recitals and bar mitzvahs and birthday parties. And then, of course, we do a lot of things for big churches and government agencies that send in literally thousands and thousands of tapes, and we convert them to digital. But we actually do, because we get so many tapes in here of so many varieties, we do have to oftentimes break them open to do repairs. And so we just kind of use some of these to give you some examples of what it's like opening up these cassette tapes and looking what they look like inside and showing you the pieces and parts in there. And Phil Collins, I'm kind of a child of the 80s. And Phil Collins was so famous back in the 1980s. And I actually saw him in concert, but I didn't see him with Genesis, and I didn't see him on his solo tour. I actually saw him, believe it or not, touring with Robert Plant in 1983. Hey, hold on for just a second. We'll get right back to the video. But if you like this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we really appreciate it. Anyway, with that, back to the video. And what a lot of people may not realize is when Led Zeppelin broke up in 1980, Robert Plant went off and put a couple of solo albums out. He had his first solo album was Pictures of 11, which I don't know that people loved it. I actually really liked the album. And then he put out another album called Principle of Moments. And Phil Collins, this guy right here, famous, singer, Phil Collins, previously of Genesis, and then he has his solo career, actually played drums on those two Robert Plant solo albums. And believe it or not, he toured as Robert Plant's drummer in 1983 on the Principle of Moments tour, which is kind of amazing because Phil Collins was such a massive star at the time. This album was actually out, Hello, I Must Be Going, at the time. This was before No Jacket Required, but he was already a superstar. Face Value had come out a couple of years before this, and everybody knows that In the Air Tonight. I can hear it coming in the air tonight. Everybody knows that song. And this song, which was a huge hit. And then this album had a couple of other pretty big hits. He kind of had another song that was kind of had a similar feel to it, and it was I Don't Care Anymore, had that kind of driving beat. And then he also did a cover of You Can't Hurry Love. I can't remember, it was the Pointer Sisters, or anyway, it was just a cover tune, which also was a huge hit. But it's so interesting that he not only played on Robert Plant's albums, but he toured, and it was so amazing because Robert Plant didn't play any Led Zeppelin music, and Phil Collins, they didn't play anything Phil Collins related. He basically sat there on the drum kit. And it was kind of an interesting thing because when you think about it, it shows you who the real rock star is. I mean, it's hard to imagine people that were more famous than Phil Collins at the time, but Robert Plant asked Phil Collins to come on tour with him doing nothing but playing the drums, and Phil Collins did it. And that shows you who the real rock star is. I mean, everybody knows it's Robert Plant. Even though Phil Collins in his own right was this huge star, when Robert Plant calls and says, hey, will you go on tour with me and play drums? You go, yes, sir. And you just go. Anyway, and he did. And it was just really cool being there. And I was, 13 years old or 14 years old, going and seeing Robert Plant. And at the time, I didn't know, I didn't even know a whole lot about Led Zeppelin yet. I was just kind of figuring things out. I was a young teenager. But it was so cool, though, to just be there and see Phil Collins just playing drums for Robert Plant. Anyway, pretty neat. So this album came out in what was it, 82, came out in 1982, and it actually sold really well. And anyway, some really cool songs on here. Love Phil Collins. It was fun. All of his album covers always just had his had his face on it. The one right before this, Face Value, just had his big face on it. This one, next one, Profile. Next album, No Jacket Required, kind of had that red hue, Phil Collins face. Kind of funny how he did that. So anyway, like I said, we don't digitize these kind of tapes for people, but it is just because it's copyrighted, but this is just a standard cassette tape like any other tape you would buy. And a couple things I want to show you, and I've gone through this in other videos, but just to repeat in case you find these things interesting. These little holes right here, which is where we start the process of getting into the tape, the reason those holes are there is these trigger your cassette deck to tell you not to record over this tape. In other words, when you put this tape in a tape player that has the ability to record, one of the things that was so great about cassette tapes that people loved about them is that you could record on them. But if that little hole was right there, there was a thing in your tape deck when you put the tape in that would kind of fall in that spot, and it would disable your record button. So you couldn't record over it. Now, if you wanted to, you could record over this tape. All you'd have to do is just do something like this. Take a little piece of Scotch tape, put it over the thing, put it in your player, and then you'd be able to record over this tape. So in that way, it functioned just like any other cassette, but in the factory, they didn't put those tabs there so that you couldn't record over it. If you bought a tape that you were going to record onto, which is more like the kinds of tapes that we actually get here in the studio, they have little things over the top. Let me see, actually, I might have one right here. Okay, here's one. And you'll see right here on the top how they have those little tabs in there. And if you'll see in this one, it's removed. So this is a tape that somebody could record over. Anyway, that's what those little holes are there for. And when the tabs are in there, it allows you to record over the tape. So the other thing is, with tapes like this, let's say that this one was broken and we needed to get inside of it to repair it. Well, a lot of times in cassette tapes, they would have screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in these spots, the four corners and one right there. These tapes that were like this, that were manufactured by record companies, rarely had those screws in them. They would be kind of this plastic weld or whatever, I don't know what you call it, but they'd stick these things together, and then you'd literally have to break into it. And a lot of the tapes that we get here don't have those screws. And so we have to then go through the process if we were going to open this up and break into it. Now, the most common problem that we have with tapes that come into the studio is not actually the tape breaking. So we don't normally have to open it up, but sometimes we do. The main thing that we have to deal with, and this is what I'll show you an example of today, is we have to, oh, here we go. It's this right here, that little, in this case, it's kind of a white pad, but it's a little piece of kind of felt, and you'll see it moving right there on this little copper mount. What that looks like inside the tape is this. It's this little thing that's called a pressure pad. And what that does is it makes sure that your playhead and your tape deck gets a really solid connection on the tape by basically putting a little bit of pressure, I'll kind of show you, like that, in between the playhead and the tape. It gives it a nice solid connection. This blue tape is called leader tape, and that's what's connected to the wheel. It's a little more robust, a little more solid, kind of a piece of plastic. And when you go forward a little bit, that's when you get to the ferric oxide tape, which is what gets recorded on the brown stuff. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to open this up. So let's say that this thing was broken. A lot of times what happens is after these tapes have been sitting for a long, long time, the adhesive that holds the leader tape to the oxide tape breaks down kind of like any other piece of like Scotch tape. And then you have to, and then it just kind of comes apart. And I'll show you what it looks like here. So that's what it looks like on the one side. And when I flip it over, you'll see that there's how that little piece of adhesive spans the two pieces. And right there it's only it just connects the leader tape with the oxide. And then on that side. And all that is, this thing that spans it, it's really nothing more than just kind of like, it's just a piece of adhesive like Scotch tape. And in the factory, that's what they put on there. And what happens though is over time it breaks down, it falls off, and then when you're playing the tape, all of a sudden everything's gone because the one side gets pulled in there, the other side gets pulled into the other, and then you have to open it up and reattach them. So I'm going to show you what that would be like in case we had to do something like this. So the first thing we do is we grab this is a little better. We grab a screwdriver, and the best place to start we have found over the years, we've been doing this business for about 25 years now, and we've had to do this so many times. You'll see that there's a seam right along there. There's a seam right along there, of course, on all the sides. And then there's kind of a seam that goes in here. This one usually isn't stuck together quite the same way. You'll see that comes apart a little easier right there. But this isn't necessarily the easiest place to break it apart. So where we start, first thing we do is we actually just kind of see if we can crack it a little bit, just get the seams broken just a tiny bit to make it a little easier on us. Okay, then what we do is we'll take a screwdriver like this, and then we'll just see if we can break it apart. And you'll see right there how I just kind of broke that seam. And then see if we can do the same thing over there. And that's a good start. Then what we'll do is, and we have to be very careful because there's a couple different things we have to keep in mind. We don't want to use a screwdriver that has any magnetism on it because a lot of little screwdrivers like this are magnetic, and because this is magnetic tape inside the shell here, if you get a magnet too close to it, it can actually damage the audio. And also, we have to be a little careful because as we're jamming this in there, we run the risk of damaging the tape. Although it's very robust, we just have to be kind of careful as we do this. So this side right here is the side that has the leader. There's not as much. So I'm going to start on this side right here and see if we can break into it that way. So you'll see that the seams kind of, and sometimes it'll start tearing down. I mean, these things can become a real mess. This one's actually not too bad. There we go. You see how that just came apart. And then we're going to come down this side. There we go. And then we'll be able to get this other side fairly easy because of what we just did there. And then there we go. Hello, I must be going. Phil Collins, and we're able to open it right up like that. And that's what it looks like on the inside of a Phil Collins tape. Now, I'm going to show you. So this, you can see right there, the screwdriver kind of caught that little gasket right there. I've heard it called a few different things, like a slip sheet, I think. And anyway, but what this does, this little piece of this little black thing right here, there, you can see there's one on that side and there's one on this side. This basically keeps the oxide tape from rubbing on the plastic. And this is very low friction. And you can also see that it has a little bit, I'm going to hold it up in the light so you can see a little bit better. You can see it's a little bit embossed. There's some ridges on it. And every one of these we open up is a little bit different. But what that does is that little bit of ridge, and you can see it there too, just kind of helps the oxide wind onto the reel smoothly. It keeps it from kind of falling off from its tendency to sometimes either get jagged and fall off the side of the tape. So I'm going to take these reels and I'm going to push them over on this side. And the reason I'm doing that, we're going to have to fix that here in just a second. You'll see how flippy and stuff starts going all over the place. But there's a couple of pieces in here that are really important. This right here, and you'll see they'll fit on this side but not this side. So it's usually the case. This is a little kind of a magnetic shield, and it sits right, kind of falls right in there. And basically the point behind that is whenever you're playhead and you're playing or recording a tape, there's a little magnetic field being generated right there. And what happens, especially when you're recording over a tape, you're recording onto it, this little thing basically protects all of this from the little magnetic field that's being generated right there. And so they put this little piece of, almost all cassette tapes are going to have that little thing there. And then the other thing I was showing you a minute ago was this pressure pad. And we were looking at this from the outside, but you also notice that these things are generally interchangeable. So this is the one that we just took out, and this is the one that I was showing you. This came out of just like a TDK or a Maxell tape that we had here in the studio. And so you can see that this one will fit in there the same, just as well as that one did. These things generally speaking, are universal. There's a few variations, and we actually have some other videos we're going to make that'll show you some of the variations on these pressure pads. But and sometimes the reason we have to get into these things is we'll do it just to replace these little pads. What happens a lot of times with these is the adhesive. Yeah, this one's just held on to that little piece of copper with a little bit of adhesive. And a lot of times what happens is this thing, just over time, like any adhesive, will just break down and it'll just fall off. And you'll go to play this tape and it'll sound tinny or it won't sound very good. And the reason is because that little pad fell off. And you can just get another one and just glue it onto the mount, or find the original one and glue it on, which is what you really try to do. Because a lot of times it'll just be, for example, in this case, it would have just fallen off of the tape in some cases, and you'll look in there and it'll just be sitting in there, and you'll take it and you just glue it on with a little piece of, just like this. Or you can do what we just did and open it up and put a whole new one in, and then take the other one and not use it. So that's kind of what this whole thing is about inside. The other thing that you might find kind of interesting is how the leader tape is attached to the reel. And what you can, it may be kind of hard for you to see there, but there's kind of a little, in the reel itself, there's a little hole. And inside that little hole, what they did is they have this little kind of plastic, kind of like a post. And what they do is they take the leader tape, they push it in there, and then they take this little metal post and jam it in on top of it, and that just holds it in place. And that's how the leader tape sticks to the reel. And anyway, that's how that works. The only other thing that in here is that we have these little wheels, and these are always a little different in different tapes. In this case, this one, the post that it sits on is actually part of the plastic injection mold. You can see it right there, that originally made this tape. Sometimes what they do is they have a little piece of metal that sits there. Anyway, so that just kind of sits on, and that thing spins freely. And then the oxide, the ferric oxide tape, just kind of goes around like that, and I'll show you how this gets put back in. And by the way, if you ever do something like this, it's just a good idea just to wash your hands really well, of course. Probably goes without saying. But just because you end up handling it just a little bit, because it's so flimsy, I usually just kind of, when I'm spooling it back on, just kind of set my fingers over it just to kind of hold it in place so that it goes on the reel. I'm basically doing kind of what that little sheet normally does, just kind of hold it in place a little bit so that it sits in there. And then you'll see that it winds around that post, around around that wheel, in front of those other little pieces of plastic, and then it goes over there, and then these reels just kind of sit in those spots, just kind of loose, but they're set up in such a way that they'll stay there. They won't move, especially once you put the top back on. So now what we have to do is get these things to line up over and then put this back together. So let's say in this case, if we had opened this up and fixed it, Now we put the thing back in place, and then there's no screws holding this together, but we set it back together, and then all we have to do is take some Scotch tape and hold it, and it'll go back to functioning. This little sheet normally stays on while we close it. Sometimes it'll fall off, and then you have to manage it, but it just stayed on there. It's not, there's no adhesive holding it, and it really sets together that easily. And then from here, what we would do is we would just take a couple of pieces of Scotch tape like that to hold that together, and then another piece right there, and then Hello, I Must Be Going is fully functional again. And if we had, again, if you had a tape like this, you needed to fix it, that's what you would do. You just break it open, go through that process, do whatever repairs you needed to do, throw a little tape on because there are no screws, but that'll hold it together, and this thing will play just fine, and that's really all there is to it. And that is Hello, I Must Be Going, and that's how you would normally go through the process of breaking open a tape that doesn't have screws. Hey, thanks for watching this. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave any comments, any other things you'd like us to make videos about. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.